Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. I'm Matt Leck. With me, embarking on this solemn but important new journey for TMBS is Alicia Brooks. Hi, Alicia. And David Griscom. Hi, David.
How's it going?
Hi, Matt.
And tonight, we're going to answer a lot of your questions about the future of this show. And what we're going to do. But before we do that, David, you want to update us on the situation in Bolivia?
Yeah, I think, it's been so amazing to receive everybody's well wishes and condolences during this time. I really appreciate that. But I've been feeling very compelled to also make sure that we're continuing doing the work that we've committed to do, which is making sure that we're building an international left and that we're not allowing right-wing fanatics to rule freely around the world. And I want to make sure that people are aware of what's been going on in Bolivia, because that's been such an important story this past year and something we've been covering a lot. So for those of y'all are already familiar that there was a right-wing coup in Bolivia against the popularly elected socialist government of Evo Morales last year. And this now kind of clown fascist regime has been not only incompetent at looking out for people in this massive crisis, but has been brutally cracking down on democracy protesters and the massive popular movement. Fundamental to that is the fact that the Inez government, the coup regime, has very little popular support. The most recent polling that's come out shows that in the first round of elections, Mas is going to win in a landslide. So they've been doing everything that they can to try to stop elections and to criminalize members of the Mas party. It's very frightening to watch because they do have significant control of the security forces in Bolivia, and they have been cracking down on Mas members and also members of the labor unions in Bolivia, as well as indigenous leaders. And, just a quick and dirty, run through. Inez has now canceled elections for Bolivia 3 times and is now completely reliant on military support for their regime. There's been continued roadblocks and popular movements against the coup government, but the security forces have been coming down very brutally, including paramilitary forces with fascist sympathies, overt fascist alliances. So we need to make sure that we're continuing to watch the situation and showing solidarity, because not only is it important for us as leftists in the United States, but it's also critical because the Trump administration has been very critical in propping up this Inez government. A very clear example of that has been the return of U.S. aid to Bolivia, the organization, an organization that Evo Morales kicked out of the country in 2013 because he rightfully recognized that this so-called, charity organization is an arm of U.S. Soft power and destabilization forces. So we need to maintain critical support on elected officials in the United States to not allow this kind of coup regime to be able to continue to subvert democracy in a country that has seen a really, really difficult time, especially with COVID. And now they're trying to use COVID as an excuse to not have democracy in the country. So we're trying to watch it as closely as we can. I highly suggest everyone else continue to do your own research on the subject, but this needs to be something that continues to be a critical movement of the U.S. left, is showing support and solidarity with the labor unions, the indigenous people of Bolivia, and the people who are clamoring for democracy in that country.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, David.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out where this. Okay, here it is. So I got this picture of Inez just to remind people who she is. She's the one who was holding up the Bible after this.
Familiar.
The comically large.
The ridiculous. Yeah. Let's see. See.
Oh my.
So against just indigenous people, right? Like, we're going to use our Bible to take care of the satanic indigenous people. And I think she tweeted that out.
How it never changes.
Oh yeah.
There's never a new trick.
No, absolutely. But it should also be noted by people too how obviously it's a coup, so it's undemocratic. But this is a senator who came into power. I mean, she comes from a very obscure position before. She wasn't a very well-known political figure. The right has always been trying to undermine Evo Morales, but they have never been able to create like a united front against him. And the only way they were going to come into power was with military force. And it just should be noted, like, this is somebody who won election with like less than 50,000 votes, right? This is not somebody who is representative of, you know, the larger forces in Bolivia. So as we noted many times, all these nonsense liberal pundits who were talking about restoring democracy were full of shit.
Yeah.
Oh, surprise. I guess we have another story later on that's similar with that we'll end the show on. But yeah, do we want to get to the Q&As?
Yeah. You know, I just want to introduce this like concept to some people who might not be familiar with this. Like, you know, Q&As, think tanks. We were trying to do a lot more of these over the past few months. I really love these. You know, so we're taking questions from people. We're going to start out focusing on questions that we received on Patreon. But, you know, please send us super chats and we'll be happy to answer those questions as well as we go forward. But yeah, I think, you know, that one of the major themes of the questions that we're getting on Patreon was going to be on the nature of the work going forward, potential ideas about documentaries and, you know, the foundation. And I just wanted to throw to Alicia on this, if you wanted to maybe start talking about, you know, ideas for foundation first, and then we can all sort of talk about, you know, show stuff.
Totally. I was smiling at the end of Bolivia, not because any of that's fun, but because early on when Michael was breaking what was actually happening in Bolivia, I was taking an acting class in LA, and there was a Bolivian woman who, you know, is from a wealthy landowning family there, and she was in hysterics about just like crying and saying it was so beautiful, the people of her country had risen up and there was going to be a dictator and they had removed him. And I was like sitting there being like, I felt like I was like in the Twilight Zone. And then I remember calling Michael, just being like, I just had a very crazy experience. This woman just like flipped 20 people in this acting class to just, you know, believe that you know, a savior is coming to help Bolivia. And, you know, these are like pretty progressive people. They just didn't really know what was happening. It was just such a like reminder of just how compelling like personal emotion is in these stories, and how easy it is to just manipulate narrative when people aren't doing their own work, aren't doing the research, aren't paying attention. It's just yet again another reminder about how we all have to do that. And that was so much of the work Michael did for us, was just he took the time to actually read. And not to, yeah, this is 100% throwing this at myself. This is not like a, you know, preachy moment. And so I've been looking at all these messages, and a lot of people have kind of echoed my own thoughts, which is like there are all these areas that Michael was kind of holding us up. And, you know, in regards to a foundation and in regards to where the show goes in the future, we don't want to get into like the nitty gritty of a lot of it, because we want to take time to, like, you know, Michael liked to be impeccable and very, like, you know, he wanted things to be done properly. So we don't want to just throw out all this stuff. But I think a big part of the foundation, I would hope, and this is something, you know, we'll be discussing as a team, and my family will weigh in, and friends of the show will have ideas. A lot of that will be an educational component, trying to get Michael's honestly writing, maybe the illicit history, just in schools and just out more broader in the world. And also hopefully it'll be a foundation that encourages us to like really listen and really learn, and not just fall into this like annoying cultural zeitgeist of reading headlines and all that matters is, you know, I have the better take, or, you know, I'm more informed. But actually informing ourselves, actually having the curiosity, encouraging curiosity and compassion, I think, you know, would be a big goal. So yeah, well, I don't want to just mumble on and on, but someone explicitly had asked about a documentary about Michael's life, and I think, yes, that would be something that hopefully, I've been thinking about that as well. I think a lot of people are. That would hopefully also fall under an umbrella of a future foundation. I think that's all I should word vomit right now.
No, I mean, that's really great, and I love the idea of, you know, continuing the education work through a foundation. And you know, I'll just say about the show going forward, because, you know, the three of us and a lot of other people close to this project have been talking about it a lot. And, you know, one thing that's really important for us going forward is that we come back as strong as possible. But I want people to be, filled in the sense that, like, yes, we're going to continue doing the shows, the Tuesday shows, and we're going to keep the structure, main show, post game, Sunday episodes. We might tweak some things to do some things a little bit differently. But this project, in the form that it, y'all have been supporting it for a long time, is going to continue. We're still going to have video presence. We're still going to be making, podcasts and doing, Sunday interviews, and all of those things are going to be continuing. We're just taking a little bit of time, one, because we're all sort of going through waves of one, grief and all of these, emotions and dealing with, a lot of the questions that have arisen. But, I want everybody to know that we are really committed to coming back really strong in the form that we've been doing for a long time. And I hope that sort of answers that question, because I know a lot of people are really passionate about the work that we've been doing. We want to continue it and want y'all to know that that's the plan. And
we want to continue to own Tuesday night, or whichever night we continue to do it on, basically.
Exactly.
And it's going to take a while for us to ramp it up, because it's going to require a lot more work from each of us.
The brilliant mind and humor, and it is a literal thing that is missing.
Yeah.
It's a void. We've all been expressing that. Like we all have to step it up. The other thing I was thinking about is just that this is a really unique community. Like Michael kind of, and we're just starting to really know, I think a lot of people who we just thought maybe were casual viewers were very involved in this work and this mission. And so I think especially as people that live in America, it's like the world we live in is so focused on America. And this, I think, is Michael was creating something that was so global and so international, and there's just no way we can let this fall apart or end. It's a vital thing, and I know for a fact Michael would be livid if we didn't continue to grow and build this community.
Yeah. Well, if y'all are ready, we might start to go into more of the kind of political Q&A stuff. And by
the way, super chats, we will be taking those a little bit later on too. So you can get those going. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, we're trying to return to a little bit of that think tank structure. So one of the number one questions that we got were book recommendations, which is something that Michael will do really great live streams where he would sort of talk about a book that he's reading. I would do some live streams on that too, and that's been a big part of the project. So I think we all sort of have a couple of book suggestions. And if one of y'all want to start, and I can go after.
Yeah, I want to, let me bring it up here, but I want to start with the first book. I was going through my text with Michael and just the images. And the very first image he ever sent me was of this book that he was reading, A Legacy of Liberation, Thabo Mbeki and the Future of the South African Dream by Mark Jevisser, a South African journalist. And let's see if I can pull up a page here. Okay, here's a Queen's Library page. Let's share this. And I read it last week. And I see why, because the type of, and I think the ANC struggle in general, the type, they saw all this stuff. Any sort of intra-party, intra-left splits that we might be experiencing now, and difficult, which side of this issue do we come down on? Are we going to get sectarian about it? The ANC went through all that stuff, identity politics and communists, and like real versions, the original versions of all of those words, right? And let me just share the book. And so I was reading it, and I knew exactly why Michael, and it was the first thing, back in 2016, he told me to read it. And that would be the first one I would recommend, because you talk a lot about these issues, and it's if all the case studies you have is what you've gone through on Twitter, I frankly I'm not that curious about what you have to say. But if you can contextualize what you're saying and show us that you've put the work in understanding historical struggles, then you become a lot more credible, in my opinion. So that would be my first recommendation.
Yeah. And they also had to deal with not only, what you mentioned too, but also like being a kind of left project in a post-Soviet world too, which is something that when we rely on a lot of these older texts too, it's a completely different context that we're living through. So
Yeah. One completely underground too, I guess. Like you talk about, like maybe we should count our blessings that we're not being like arrested for decades at this point.
I think Mike
Right.
got paranoia about that.
Oh yes, trust. I've shared that with Michael too. I mean, knock on wood, we don't know how
I
long
think,
this is going to be allowed.
yeah, I know. I like that. Unfortunately, that was something that was a bit of anxiety, and that
Yeah.
I also, I don't. We have to go there, but
No.
mhm.
just not go.
Wait till the McCarthy 2 hearings are come through Hollywood again, and
the
we get you in
connection
trouble.
to cancel culture. I think for Michael, that was. I think the anxiety was, McCarthy.
I mean, look, the
McCarthy
thing with
too.
Truanon,
Yeah.
and like Brace Belden, and because he went.
Oh,
and
you
fought
guys aren't into Q?
yeah, I mean, speaking of,
That's what
speaking
this
of,
podcast is about.
yeah, we have some editorial changes to announce tonight, everybody.
Get through the queue.
We're gonna do a Q segment.
That'd be
We're just gonna call it balls and strikes, though. Not trying to be
Wait.
objective about it.
Sorry, I found out what Q was last week, so
No, that's
I'm late on this.
I'm fascinated by that stuff personally.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I can jump through mine real quick. I'm going to do a rapid fire, some quick ones, just because I think these are foundational. And if you'll spend any time with me, I really do try to push people to return to the classics. The first one is obvious. People should get the Marx Engels Reader by Robert Tucker. Indispensable, really crucial collection of Marx's writings that I think really need to be grounding us today. And, a lot of people think they understand Marx because they can absorb people who are talking about Marx constantly. But it's really important to return to those source texts. I always suggest people spend a little bit of time and read the Communist Manifesto. It's literally 30 minutes. And I'm amazed sometimes at how infrequent that is understood text by people. Critique of the Gotha program is another phenomenal one.
Well, Jordan Peterson taught us that all you really need to read is the Communist Manifesto, and you
Yes,
basically
who saw a reading of the
Well,
Communist.
he's right.
It's about identity politics, apparently. I highly suggest that, and then just rapid fire too. Another great Robert Tucker collection of essays is the Lenin Anthology. I highly suggest people spend some time reading Lenin. Lenin, I think, is a very misunderstood thinker, especially since there are so many people who sort of drape themselves in a kind of, the kind of like, anime Leninist people that y'all see are very different from like the actual really existing and thinking Lenin. Especially his earlier writings, like What Is to Be Done, I think are very important for a moment like today where the left feels really fragmented. And another just like key text too is The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. I can't suggest this book enough. It really changed my life and my politics immensely, not only because he was really charting such a radical and important moment in history, which was all of these post-colonial revolutions, but he was preparing for many of the pitfalls that came about within those. He is one of the most amazing people and an incredible writer and an actual revolutionary. So I can't suggest that enough. And just really,
David, in that lane, I also just finished reading How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. He mentions Fanon quite a lot. Are you familiar with Walter Rodney?
Yeah, Walter Rodney is
interesting.
Really absolutely a phenomenal thinker. Somebody you should definitely have on your bookshelf. I have, Michael and I were actually talking about Walter Rodney a lot recently, and we both picked up this book too, The Russian Revolution: A View from the Third World, which is really interesting.
That's so funny. I was just Michael and I have recently been talking about the Russian Revolution. I was wondering if either of you had a recommendation on that, because that was such a pivotal slit of a party to examine.
Rodney died young though, right? How many books did he get out?
I actually don't know much about his biography on that level. I know more as a thinker.
Interesting.
But on the Michael kick, one thing that Michael and I both like to talk about, and is a really important thinker for me, And we've always, and it's one of those things, obviously there's so many unfinished works and conversations, but, Machiavelli, too, the Portable Machiavelli is a great text that you can get a lot of his work, including the discourses, which are, different from the Prince, which most people are familiar with. But Machiavelli is a really radical, and I would say what he did was he reinstated the people as a concept in political philosophy. And there's a reason that people consider him to be one of the most important of the quote unquote modern political theorists. And I can't suggest enough, especially for people who have read Machiavelli before and might want to get back into it. This text by Louis Althusser called Machiavelli and Us is a really phenomenal companion reader with it. It's a short text, but it's very, it's definitely something that you need to take your time reading. It's only 100 pages, but you have to take your time reading with it. For people who aren't familiar, Althusser is one of the great Marxist theorists, and specifically with a return to Marx. While a lot of people in the New Left were sort of moving away from Marx, Althusser was a really adamant person about returning to a kind of Marxist interpretation of the world. Anyways, he does a really wonderful job with this text, actually trying to take an old text like the Prince and really drag it into the present. So
right.
Those are, well, I'm sorry, I have a bunch, but just one last one.
That's good.
This one is a really great one too. Open Veins of Latin America. By Eduardo Galeano. This takes basically the story of Latin America through the European colonization and exploitation. And not only is it a really important text for American and European leftists to read, it really puts those things in context in the actual global historical scale, right? Because you can read texts from history and you say, oh man, this was so bad, and you should have that when you read this text, because it's horrible what what all of these European powers did to that part of the world. But what's really amazing about it is he actually identifies how critical the exploitation of Latin America was to the success of European capitalism. They turned Latin America into an open pit mine, and the amount of wealth that they were able to, mineral wealth essentially, and human labor and all of these things that they were able to extract actually is equal to the capital investment in the United Kingdom at the very beginning of their industrialization, right? So the point there is you thinking about history as Marxist, understanding that these histories actually have a very serious material basis, and they explain a lot of the ways that the world works today or looks today.
I mean, it's very kind of way too watered down, but I mean, quite simply, if you follow the money, there at some point there is a quite literal, extraction of wealth or material that is at the base of most systems we see today. I know recently it's become more known in kind of broader culture because of videos online, like what happened with Haiti, for instance. Just these systems. I mean, what bank what was it, Chase or there was some bank that is still collecting up until the 1940s money from Haiti. That's an American bank that's still open today, and it's connecting these dots it's just so important, because people, I think, just kind of feel like, oh, that's just the way things are. That's just kind of the way things have to operate. And as soon as you start to peel back the curtain, it gives you the ability to really talk about it with people, because otherwise it's just kind of these abstract words that people are able to kind of push you aside, or it's you don't understand how the real world works, and it's no, this is actually what happened.
So very simple to say, where did all this luxury and wealth come from that made this society so popular? It's because of this, we're so smart that we thought all of it, or is it because of the giant shipping of including human bodies that you're taking part in? Maybe that has something. I actually just finished up Galeano too in the past week, because there's a few books you need to read when you realize you're going to have to cover part of Michael's portfolio, and that's one of them. What's a little bit depressing to find out is Galeano has said he can't read that book anymore, but he won't say why. It's people are saying it's some sort of conservative turn, but he won't say specifically what it is. He just say the prose was too vulgar Marxist or whatever. But ignore him.
Okay.
and read his
And read
book
it.
because it's a
Okay.
great book.
Oh, I,
Actually,
I hate when people turn evil or weird.
I mean, he
Um,
was like an author, right? Like, I mean, who
yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
You can't trust the intelligentsia.
Speaking of the intelligentsia, no. I have to say the number one book Michael would recommend would be his own
Oh,
book,
yeah.
Against
Sold
the
out a lot
Dragon.
of places.
Sold out. I mean, who would have thought that this original pressing or order would become such a rare edition? So actually, someone reached out to me on Instagram and they had ordered a bunch and they want to do a giveaway. So keep your eyes out for that. I think we're going to give away something like 30 copies of the book. But my mom and I were texting about Michael Reed's, and it's there's so many, and we kind of thought it'd be fun to share some things he liked when he was younger. At the memorial service, my mom mentioned this, and I just keep thinking about this. As a child, Michael loved Robin Hood. He really liked all the mythology of him stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. He also loved, as a little kid, the Redwall books. He liked all the he liked all the mythology stuff. He liked Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. So that kind of makes me I don't know, something about the escapism of right now and kind of getting to get into some of that. Just really classic literature and heroes' journeys can be nice. I mean, we're definitely gonna have to just throw together like a pretty massive like reading library. In high school, Ken Wilber was a big influence on him. A lot of the people that are on the show are, some of his favorite authors, Cornel West and Adolph Reed.
Of course, yeah.
The People's History of the United States, Howard Zinn, and again, that was obviously in high school. This is 100% me. There are huge gaps in my knowledge that I just, leaned on Michael for. I hopefully a lot of people watching are probably way more on it, but he recommends Neoliberalism by Harvey. Do one of you guys remember?
Was it David Harvey?
David Harvey. I know that he feels like that's an important read to just kind of get a little bit more like nuanced about some of the language we throw around. We say neoliberal, we say technocrat, and we kind of have this general understanding, but it can be helpful to kind of dig into what's under it and the history of how these terms are built.
Yeah, I would just suggest to everybody, because one thing that's been really enriching in my life is like not thinking that you've been exposed to everything. Like, yes, if you spend enough time reading or dealing with history, like, yes, you might have a general idea of like what this thinker's ideas were, what this history was, but I'm telling you, whenever you actually spend time and with source material and going deep into these things, it's highly rewarding. And there's really almost like even something like the American Revolution, for example, studying that again can be very beneficial.
Yeah. Another one I would just add, CLR James's Black Jacobins just came out on Audible. I'd read that before, but listening to it again today, just walking around Brooklyn, it's just all-time amazing book. So I definitely recommend that. And also on Audible, for people who get their stuff through Audible, is the Eric Hobsbawm Age of quadrilogy. I always call it a trilogy because I'd only actually read the one on the long 19th century. But all four: the Age of Revolutions, the Age of Capital, and the Age of, I missed one, Extremes, and there's another one in there. But those are amazing general purpose, mainly European, Eurocentric histories of like labor and class struggle. So that's a great place to start for people.
And one more now. And also Religions of the World by Houston Smith, I know, is a book. I know some people have been asking about spirituality and religion in the questions. Speaking of Audible, does anyone know of an Audible alternative? I love audiobooks and would love to not use Amazon. I use my local library, which everyone should check out. You could download apps that have audiobooks from your library. You sometimes have to wait a while, but it's free. But also, if anyone knows of Audible alternatives where you can get new books immediately, I'm always looking for leads on that.
Yeah, I don't use any of the other ones really.
Just try not to give Bezos a kickback.
Oh, I've had Audible since before it was bought by Bezos.
I did
it's
too.
really irritating.
I know, it drives me nuts. It's like I pulled out big banks and now I'm like, now I have to pull out Audible.
I mean, I just make sure I spend all my credits on Marxists.
There you go.
Like
there
that,
you go.
Bezos.
There you go. And you have unlimited returns, so you can kind of work the system.
You can, yes. Take advantage of that, folks.
So should we do another one of these questions from a Patreon?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's keep going with the Patreon. These are on are these on like a Patreon page or are these on Discord?
These are on our Patreon page. I put up a post. So there's a
Patreon page post.
Yes. It was made as a post, and we have about like 80 or 90 questions, so we're not going to be able to get to all of them, unfortunately. A lot of them were about stuff about the show and the book, so I'm trying my best to synthesize ones. But I know this one, you were sort of hinting at it, Alicia, so I wanted to bring this up before we got to some of the more like specifically political. But this
Sure.
this is from Daniel, and I'm just going to try to synthesize this really quickly.
Sure.
So they want to ask sort of about, Michael, how they remember that Michael had mentioned how important the Hindu goddess Kali was to him. They don't want anyone to speak for Michael, but, maybe we could talk about how, he was thinking about spirituality or what the discourses on the left focuses on when that is the topic. And then generally they just say, like, how can we foster honest debates, not just on TMBS, but maybe around the country? And we might need those liberal enlightenment values to build Marxist, socialist, communist modes for development.
Yeah, I have a couple things to say, and I think that Michael wanted our kind of teacher and his secret weapon. He was going to have an interview with Susan, and I'd like to interview Susan and let her speak more fully on this, because I think that was something they spoke about a lot. Kind of the quick answer to this question is that Michael really thought it was like unfair and unjust that essentially the right has like a monopoly on spirituality and religion, and that there's kind of this mark of like, intellectual superiority with being an atheist. And I can tell you now that my brother has died, and I'm in like, honestly, just full shock. I don't even know if I'm in grief yet. I think I'm still in full denial and shock. But spirituality is really helpful to be able to ground and move forward. And a lot of what we're going to have to do on the left, you're going to have a deep reserve of compassion and strength. And I think Michael saw that you can really mine that from spirituality. And that does not mean using spirituality to stop being judgmental and curious and, really grappling with the evils in the world. It's not about placating or using spirituality as, an opioid of the masses. It's about just developing deep reservoirs of compassion and strength. And I think Kali is this warrior who murders and vanquishes evil, and yet is this serene, powerful goddess. And so I think that's a slim answer on this, and I look forward to Susan answering that in depth. But I think that's kind of the spark notes on Michael, religion, and in terms of opening up the dialogue in debate. I think a lot of people maybe don't want to hear your personal experience, but if you can talk about Cornel West being, a Christian gangster, or you can reference other people that you cannot knock their intellect, and yet they reference their connections to God or religion or spirituality or energy or whatever language you want to use. I think that can be helpful in sometimes having those conversations if you feel like it's just like makes you look stupid, which sucks, because that shouldn't be. That's like, I think, yet another problem with the left is this kind of like just constantly knocking each other down and belittling people who aren't 100% in line with your interpretation of that.
And it's ironic that like the IDW includes people like Sam Harris, who basically exhibited the worst kind of excesses of atheism and cancel. Look at YouTube used to be like, look at Sam Harris. Sam Harris destroyed this Muslim with logic, right? Like that's like early YouTube clickbait. And like that's why because I wasn't a Sam Harris fan. I became more of a leftist once I saw what was happening with the New Atheists. And Michael was as good as anyone as elaborating that.
Sure.
And it was basically that sort of like the hostility against spirituality, and it's clear like that's some sort of there's something wrong with that there. It's serving power in some way, otherwise it wouldn't have been juiced the way it was.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we all came up at a time where like just things just got so crazy with just vilifying and just creating like the boogeyman of anything Muslim. And I think that was part of early kind of just, I don't know, I just remember Michael being young and just being so aware of Islamophobia at a young age, and just also seeing like just beauty in teachings about, and I think that's maybe one of the early seeds of this.
I would just add specifically to Matt's point, and like Michael's work and targeting like the IDWs, like I think there definitely is a project there. I think it's really well summed up with what Chomsky said to Sam Harris in their little tip. He says Chomsky is a religious fanatic who worships the state. Yeah. I mean, sorry, Sam Harris is a religious fanatic who worships the state, right?
I was like, I missed that clip.
Did Chomsky, or did Harris say that about Chomsky? That's crazy.
That's hysterical.
But I mean, that's essentially what all of that ended up being, right? And it's a great example of, how ideology does play, a political role, and specifically at that time, it was being used to drum up support for a horrible imperialist war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah. So understanding that tradition, I mean, I'll say on a note, like, I have a lot of traditions that are important to me, specifically like literature and the human tradition. I'm an atheist, but I do think it's important to not shy away from conversations of one, bettering yourself, and from working on like personal growth. I think that one of the great examples of how the right is dominating this is like Jordan Peterson, right? Mm-hmm. Jordan Peterson is speaking to people who are feeling a little bit lost and they need some guidance and direction. And, he's saying, oh, well, here are these answers. They're horrible answers, and they're being used to promote a right-wing project. But I think that's something that, us on the left need to be a little bit stronger at creating for people, because there are a lot of people who are lost and looking for answers and community. I mean, I think I've shared this story with Michael before and other people. I didn't grow up with a father. So like any kid on the internet, I went online to learn how to shave. And I was curious recently to see, if I could find that website, and I found it. And it's just like a crazy town, men's rights kind of thing, right? I had no idea, I just went on it. But anyways, the point is like those guys are sitting in wait for people who are like needing a little bit of guidance. Yeah. And we desperately need to make sure we're leaving that space to them.
Well, on the same note as that, like we make fun of like Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro all the time for talking about the new Avengers movie. Well, yeah, their ideas is always things that it's teenage culture, right? And like it's just because they mentally aren't capable of more than that. Ben Shapiro's not really a philosopher,
stunted,
right?
So they can't really speak up, but sure.
But as a marketing, like, that's who their audience is. They're getting all these kids.
The maneuver is brilliant, honestly.
Exactly. I mean, you meet people where they are. I mean, that's something Michael always wanted us to do, and like that. I mean, that is something you need. You can't just talk to the people who are already ideologically leftists. I mean, that's frankly not. I mean, that was never this project anyway.
No, and Michael kind of I think he was kind of resentful that the left didn't want to make things cool and attractive to people. He was like, why does the right get to just to have so much of the things that are appealing to kids? Why can't this look I know he's always kind of into gangster movies or whatever, but just a certain amount of just raw realness, and also just it being the thing you want to do. How do you get kids in these towns to think that being left is just the more interesting, edgy thing, and not the soft pussy track? I don't know. Just to be blunt, the marketing to the general world is that the left is just soft and can't handle criticism and just kind of turns in on itself.
Yeah.
And hated that. And so part of it was like grounding and having like the core to just be defiant of that. I mean, we know that's not the case, but that is the messaging.
Absolutely. Do we have any super chats, or I have plenty of Patreon?
Yeah, let's go through. We don't have any. Well, so Julian Franks asked, "What's everyone's sun, moon, and rising?" And I looked that up, and I don't believe the answer to that because it says I'm a Virgo ascendant, but that's not right. I was born December 5th. So I don't know what sun, moon, rise, and all that stuff is.
Okay, so it's like your astrological sign, but then it's like where the sun and moon were when you were born. It's specific to where in the globe and what time. So you have to plug in your date of birth, place of birth, and time.
And the time, yeah,
Yes.
and
so.
But
My
so it completely
writing
changed
partner
my sign.
Dan can do your chart right now. I can text some information, but I don't know if you have it.
To be honest, I'm not 100%
You're
sure
not.
on my birth time. So
Okay. Well, maybe next week.
Yeah, look forward to that.
I'm a Taurus, and I mix it up, but I think my sun is Pisces, and I have to text Dan. He knows my chart. You know anything about yours, David?
Oh, you are going to have to squeeze that information out of my life.
Okay.
I mean,
is everyone signing off right now that I'm getting into this?
No, I mean, Michael
slamming across the internet.
No,
TMBS audience is used to.
I grew up with a pretty, spiritual hippie world around me, and my family's still like that. And I'm not the biggest fan of all that stuff. I will be obligated to say I highly suggest people read Adorno's book on astrology, Down from the Stars, which is a really phenomenal text on the LA Times astrology section.
I'm getting revisions. I'm a Pisces rising. We'll have to wait for this to get in. Sorry to interrupt, David. It was all caps. It got my attention.
I'm just doing my due diligence there.
My mom also might be. My mom is panicking. Sun in Taurus. I don't think that's real. All right, we'll put it all at the end. Just exactly say this. I will say that Michael, August 13th, he shared a birthday with Fidel Castro, which is something he bragged about for many years. His birth chart was very, very unusual and extreme, and maybe my mom can talk to the 5 people that's interested about this at another time with me.
So Adored Pariah, thanks for keeping up the fight. Can't express how much it means to me. My book recommendation would be Imagined Communities. I think that's by Benedict Anderson, right? That is a good book. But that's a bit generic. A text specifically on cosmopolitanism, maybe. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Did you ever discuss those, David?
Nothing specifically on cosmopolitanism as like a philosophy that I can think of. I mean, we did talk about Stuart Hall's criticism of the 90s idea of cosmopolitanism. I think we played a clip of it on the show.
Yeah.
People are treating cosmopolitanism as I have, sushi on Wednesday and I hang out, at the airport in Tokyo and have Indian food, and criticizing that kind of a borderless world that only exists for the global elite. And I know that was something that Michael in his book and his work really wanted to push back against, was this kind of hijacking of the idea of cosmopolitanism as a kind of status symbol or a commodity to be consumed by the rich. But I don't have any suggestions on that.
Yeah.
Stuart Hall's a good place to look, though.
Yeah, Stuart Hall's an interesting thinker for sure. I have plenty of Patreon questions if we're ready for that, or
let's. We don't have a lot of questions. A lot of people just sort of speak just subsidy. Greg, does the name Rudolph Steiner mean anything to you?
It does. Do you want me to elaborate?
If you want to, yeah.
Rudolph Steiner is a German philosopher, and he developed a type of education called anthroposophical education. He developed Waldorf schools, if you know what they are. So very simply, there's 3 stages of education or developmental stages: birth through 7, where you develop someone's heart; 7 to 14, you develop the imagination; and 14 to 21, you develop the intellect. And the idea is that you have the heart and creativity to, execute understanding the world. And then there's different elements of philosophy that have to do with gardening and other parts of life. I did attend a Waldorf school as a child. Maybe that is why it's coming through the super chat. That's what I've got on Rudolph Steiner.
All right, let's see. We got suggestions for Gore Vidal's essays, which I have not read much of essays, but Lincoln is one of the greatest historical novels of all time. The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell is a very interesting book. What are we going to do to help build co-ops? It's an interesting question, maybe for a future show, though. And that looks about it for questions. Do we have any election results? We aren't really monitoring elections super close tonight. Are you, David? Do you have any?
No,
seen anything?
Obviously, fingers crossed for Rashida. But I don't know. That still might be pretty early days. I mean, as we've said a few times when we've tried to do election results stuff right now, due to the nature of mail-in voting and stuff, it seems like the idea of getting instant election results might be a thing of the past, at least for a little while going forward.
Which, I mean, I'll say as somebody who's covered election nights for 4 or 5 years now, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, fair enough.
Oh man, it's so tiring.
So, if you're all ready, we have some interesting questions, and I'm going to synthesize this for this person. I don't know if I agree with the framing completely, but basically Ben is asking that since Bernie's dropped out, he has the impression that he's become person non grata, which I don't know is the case. But given that he was operating the most restrictive of political environments and had to walk such a tightrope to remain even on the fringes of the mainstream, is it possible that he really is further left than he lets on? Also, bringing class consciousness to the masses was really a major victory.
Yeah.
And then they throw in a joke, which some people might get, or as some have suggested, is he really personally responsible for the death of Rosa Luxemburg? Which is something that, anyways, people accuse
of the internet
of like participating in. But I mean, I think we made Bernie Sanders' campaign a major part of our work. And I think that anyone on the left in the United States, if you didn't see this as an incredible opportunity to mainstream a lot of our ideas, to destigmatize our movement and the word socialist, for example, it was absolutely immense. I say all the time, it's difficult to say right now just because these past few months and obviously these past 2 weeks have been so difficult, but the position that we are in would have felt unimaginable even 5 years ago, with the organized left having a serious campaign for the presidency, the fact that we're communicating with all of these people right now on YouTube and we have strong left-wing media, I think is really important to put things in that perspective. The questions, and these are my personal thoughts on the matter, the question of Bernie Sanders himself, what his political orientations are. I think with Bernie, I think that with Bernie, you got what he thought for the most part. I think that he knew that on some levels he had to play a kind of game rhetorically. But I think that Bernie was really consistent. And, one thing that people always loved about Bernie is that he was consistent. And actually, he was a very radical thinker in the American context for a very long time, especially to be an elected official. And what's happened now is that there's just been a stronger base around him. I mean, we've talked a lot about what not having Bernie Sanders as our presidential candidate anymore means for the left. And, there's a weakness. Bernie Sanders held a lot of people together. He held a left movement that really does need structure and organization together. In a way that without that structure, it's really difficult, right? Because we don't have strong political parties or organizations. Groups like DSA, Socialist Alternative are great, but they're not the kind of mass movement that we need. Not saying they can't become that. So it's a difficult position to be in without Bernie Sanders. That being said, moving into this next phase of our movement is really exciting. Because we actually aren't so tied to one individual. Though, that was one of the difficult aspects of Bernie's. If Bernie said something, we all needed to, to stand with them. We push back on things when he would say something that was a little boneheaded or whatever. But now we have a little bit more freedom to actually articulate the vision of this very young radical left-wing movement, which is very daunting because there's so many different people who are trying to take on that position. But it's a huge opportunity, and that's how we should see it. And I don't think that. So just last thing, I just think that in the long history of things, Bernie Sanders is going to be remembered very fondly as a very critical and important person, and somebody who's been inspirational to me, and I would imagine everyone here.
Yeah, I would just caution people against being so focused on the sort of idealism of it. Like one thing I didn't really care about during the campaign was when people would say they're to the left of Bernie because of X or Y positions. It's like, well, do something about it. Do something with it. Mm-hmm. Whether Bernie's hiding his secret full communist agenda, I think is less important than the actual work that he did. And I think that's something. Work is more important than takes.
You don't think he was a Russian plant?
Well, I mean, that's why I think the work he did was great.
You didn't watch the video of the honeymoon? So I just think that Michael was just kind of annoyed that people were getting so this is another example of people on the left just getting so down and just kind of there's no moving forward and so dramatic. He was like, no, look at what this has made people wake up and realize we're actually in a great place. And Bernie worked within the system. I don't know if you can it's a really complicated thing to talk about and navigate because obviously you don't ever want to use that as an excuse for doing egregious things, but yes, there is a reality to showing up to certain government jobs, and there are certain things you cannot do and cannot push because it's just not the reality. But I think Bernie was, I don't know, it's just all our take. I'm not Bernie Sanders. I'm not a member of the Sanders family. I haven't sat at their dinner table. I don't know his secret inner workings. But I think that the important thing to take away is where we are from where we were in terms of the movement and how much he was able to push it into the mainstream and also impact a lot of quote unquote normies or whatever you want to say. So that's more significant than and I'm not saying that anyone saying otherwise, but I think the speculation of his own political ideology is sort of at this point a little beside the point.
And I can say in terms of specifics, one thing that I think Bernie believes that he downplayed during the whole course of the campaign is if you look at him talk about the Jesse Jackson campaign and their decision to endorse the Jackson campaign, he's very clear that he thinks there are limitations to presidential electoral politics. Mm-hmm. I don't think Bernie stopped having those. And in fact, I think it meant that in 2016, he wasn't really running to be president. He was running for the message campaign. And I think there was actually some degree of that in 2022, although I think he thought he might have been the candidate to win. But I think when people were saying Bernie didn't pull all the punches or he didn't do anything that might sacrifice his movement, he played very conservatively. And that's because I think he doesn't view the presidency as the thing that could have accomplished it all himself. Right. So if there was something he's hiding, I would say that's it.
And also he loves rape culture.
Yeah, read his essays.
Yeah, read his essays, guys. Wild stuff.
David, I have a question for you first question for Alicia. Alicia, is that a Kendrick Lamar shirt?
The answer is yes.
If so, hell yeah. Okay.
I was like, oh
no. Let's see. David and Matt, is there anything? We have one from April Shadows here. I tried to reach out to Brooks about SRA in the past. Do you believe the left should be educated and capable of violence in order to defend good people?
That's the Socialist Rifle Association.
Yeah.
So, I think that, I'll just, say I'm from the South and, I don't share a lot of liberals kind of feelings towards gun culture. It's not something that's completely foreign to me. I think that there are a lot of really radical and inspiring movements of self-defense in left-wing history. So I think that it's definitely a great place for people who want to organize together in those spaces, in the sense of I want there to be people in all kind of cultural and social spheres who are promoting left-wing ideas. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important though, with the willingness of the right to engage in violence, that we be really careful with putting ourselves into positions where we could, not saying we don't defend ourselves when you need to, but not going into situations where you might antagonize folks because they are nuts and they are blood, killers. Like they are prepared to
Yeah,
do
it's
serious
true.
violence. So I don't have like a hot take. I think a lot of the stuff that I see, I'm not a member, but a lot of stuff I see is really good, social stuff, I think. But I also get worried sometimes that we just need to be really careful that we're tactically less than the message of, should socials have guns? I think that's fine. Um,
Yeah.
but like tactically, we got to be really careful because as we saw, for example, in Austin, I mean, these guys are ruthless killers.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I lived in a more gun-friendly state, I probably would have a firearm for personal defense. I grew up around guns. My dad's a big hunter, and I've hunted all my life. But I will say, if you do think about going down this route, take uh, gun safety as seriously as you've ever taken anything in your entire life. And like, I was just reading Black Against Empire. I forget who the author is, but really good on the Black Panthers and like how strategic they were about muzzle control. Right. Like you'll always see them pulling the barrel straight up or straight at the ground. Like that sort of thing is very important because you're literally, especially if you're going to carry in Texas or something like that, like, man, there are people, and in this environment, there are people waiting to take a pop. And
Yeah.
I will say just specifically on SRA, they are really good on that aspect. I mean, it's very much the serious, kind of like rifle association, how to
right.
maintain firearms, how to safe practices and things like that. I think that's really great.
Yeah.
I guess I don't really have a serious thing to weigh in on this because I grew up not around guns and whatever, but I do think like the thing you just always need to remember is just people aren't treated the same on both sides of this.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as you want to engage in something, you know, organizing, carrying guns, you are risking your personal safety at a higher level, which I know I just think that is something to think about. Like as soon as it's like if one of us has a gun, that is like such a bigger story and there's just so much more heat around it. So that's just another thing to consider, like how that narrative builds. And
Yeah.
if you being a gun carrier and protecting people is more helpful than maybe engaging in a different way, just in the climate we're in, and with the fact that there are just such sociopaths ready to go on the other side of this. I don't know if they're. It's just something to think about.
If you're not
kind
in
of
a gun,
sticking your neck out maybe a little bit.
if you're not from a gun culture and don't have any of that sort of experience, I would not advise now is the time for learning, frankly. I don't know. I kind of think it's because I see that the same way people said, I'm going to get a gun for self-defense just so somebody doesn't mug me in the Walmart parking lot. It's like, well, statistically, you're more likely to accidentally
That was David that said that?
Yeah. Yeah. Statistically, you're frankly more likely to severely injure yourself cleaning the thing than you are to ever use it in a situation like that. So I just think 100% caution for anybody that does want to think that. Speaking of 100% caution, David and Matt, is there anything a socialist can take from Nietzsche's work? I like some of his points, but obviously his views on hierarchy are problematic.
Yeah.
Nietzsche.
I mean, like, I read, Nietzsche at university, obviously, and, feel very affirmational. I do like, I do think that we shouldn't shy away, for example, from like kind of questions of greatness and recognizing that a big part of our society is like designed to try to keep, folks down. Nietzsche, for me, is not a philosopher that I draw on heavily. I think that a lot of the work that the right wing has done, though, to make it seem like Nietzsche was like a kind of like proto-Nazi or like, would have supported the fascist project is something that we absolutely should reject and push back against. But, for me, Nietzsche, like I was always, I mean, just like personally, I was always much more interested in like Sartre. As like a kind of like personal existential philosopher, but I mean, absolutely somebody that you should be reading with and engaging. I don't find Nietzsche's project and even the people who sort of grew out of him to be a kind of like left philosophical tradition that like I'm trying to draw from right now. But I don't think that it's like he's a bad or dangerous thinker or anything like that.
Do you want me to continue on with a few more of these
Sure.
ones here? How about raising money to buy Michaels and donate them to libraries? That's a good. That's how. That's how libertarianism started. Frankly, the Koch brothers, buying up Ayn Rand books and sending them to libraries. I think I have that history right. 5 rounds in the octagon MMA rules. Osama bin Laden versus Abraham Lincoln. Who you got? I gotta say Lincoln. I mean, I feel like. I mean, he was just a corporate lawyer, though. The stuff about the
He was a bit. I would go with Osama there. I think. He's
got. Well, Lincoln's got the weight advantage. Bin Laden's got an inch on him, though. So
Lincoln was supposed to be on the Oregon Trail or the Dahmer Party. I just found this out recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was like one of the family's lawyers, and they were like, "We're gonna go west. It's gonna be great." And then he like got caught up with something. He could have been a cannibal. So that makes me think maybe I don't.
Bin Laden only 6'5", 160 pounds. That is frail. That's very.
But
small.
Lincoln also had some difficulty. He was like kind of heavy on his feet.
That's true. I don't think Lincoln was.
I don't know if he was that limber.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question.
At least portrayed by Daniel Day-Lewis, he didn't seem ready to go. I don't know.
One more question for Alicia. Kendrick on Goosebumps or Collard Greens?
Collard Greens.
I like collard greens, yeah. All right, David, go for it.
Okay. Let me jump back into the Patreon. I'm just going to acknowledge a couple of these questions that I just don't think we can get into. A couple of folks were asking a pretty specific question about analytic philosophy and continental philosophy, which I know for a lot of people, don't know what we're talking about. But, the quick and dirty version of it is that like analytic philosophy is super infuriating amount of me for even giving definitions, but like you can do it regionally in that like the American philosophical tradition is much more what they would call pragmatic philosophy, a lot more dealing with like logic puzzles and stuff on that nature. And I don't mean that to demean it. My background's in continental philosophy, so I'm a little bit biased on the divide. But basically, people are asking if we could have like interesting discussion or synthesis on those, because there are, for example, a lot of like analytic Marxist philosophers. I think that I won't be able to answer that question fully, but that actually could be a really fun conversation for me and Ben Burgess to have time in the future, because I know he comes from more of the analytic tradition, while I'll sort of defend and talk through maybe some of the continental stuff. I think that could be a really interesting conversation. So thank you all for that question. And then before I get to here's a fun one from Dave from Jamaica. Out of everybody, and hi Dave, thanks for the message. Out of everyone in the IDW, who is your favorite to dunk on the intellectual dark web?
Yeah, probably Captain Ideas himself, just because Michael enjoyed it so much, and it was just Mr. Rubin is just I don't know.
Favorite is a tough term because most enjoyable and purely pleasurable is probably Dave Rubin.
It's Peterson for me. I just love it.
It's like it's hard. It's like you're at a place where you're just like making fun, but I'm still just so annoyed that it's hard. I don't know. I'll get there hopefully.
But there are other members of the IDW where I feel are more important targets at the moment, and I get a sense of satisfaction from that as well.
Who?
Which is the Weinstein brothers, I should say, just explicitly. Sure. I think they are very problematic. I have beef with them. Mm-hmm. And they aren't as fun because, frankly, they're quite boring individuals. But they're more important. So the sense of duty is there, where it's not with Dave.
So
there's not a sense of duty.
On them because there's a mission, but it's not pleasureful.
But I mean, there's pleasure in accomplishing a mission, right?
Sure,
and then you don't have any of the guilt with Dave Rubin, where you're like, well, this guy's purely completely marginalized. He's on the blaze, for Christ's sakes. No one believes he's liberal. No one knows who he is anymore. He's not even in the IDW anymore. Like they won't even talk to him.
There's a rumor, the real Dave Rubin was on the super chat last week. I mean,
Yeah, that was not the real. I've seen that guy before. That's not the real one.
For me, I'm in just my quick plug for Jordan Peterson.
your plug.
He is just so amazing. For somebody like you described this guy to me in the abstract. It's like, he thinks that like it's time to like return to like some masculinity, and he only eats red meat, right? You're like, who is this guy, right? And then you watch a video of him and he's crying on Joe Rogan's podcast because he had a sip of cider and he dealt with feelings of impending doom for an entire month. I mean, he's such an interesting enigma of contradiction and stupidity and entertainment.
That's nuts.
I love it.
Are you doing a slight Canadian accent, or is that a...
Oh, yeah.
Those were the best. I mean, I will say, not IDW, but somebody I really do miss sort of watching and making fun of and dealing with this Alex Jones, hometown hero of Austin.
Sure. Right. He's very upset.
So I have a couple of cool questions from Patreon. The first one is from, I'm trying to do only first name, so with your screen name it's hard to, but their first part of their screen
half of a screen name.
Yeah, it's Earth.
Okay.
So thank you for the question. But in the gathering momentum for independence, Scotland and Wales, how do we make use of national sentiment to drum up support for the cause, but curtail that same sentiment before it leads us into the right wing of independence politics? My sentiment would be, I'm a nationalist until we gain independence and democracy. After that, I am an internationalist. Any ideas? And somebody else asked a similar question, and they were sort of talking about, independence movements, and they think that that's the way that things are trending globally, even including a potential, breakup of the United States into smaller nations. So I'm just curious if y'all have any thoughts on that question. I know it's a big one, but I have a couple if you'll need a second to think.
Go for it.
I don't want to talk specifically about any context because they are all very different. My background way back, I mean, my family's been in the U.S. for a pretty long time, but way back is Welsh. So like that Welsh independence movement is something that's always been really interesting for me. I remember when I was studying post-colonialism, I was really interested to see if there are any like kind of Welsh thinkers who are looking at this, and there's some interesting texts on it. I can't remember the names right now, but try to synthesize ideas like phenomenon post-colonial tradition with what happened in Wales, and they're not the same, but a lot of tactics, for example, were practiced on the Welsh people. For example, banning speaking Welsh. There's a thing called the Welsh knot where you would tie a heavy board around a student who was speaking Welsh in school. And because it's, because the English have their legal tradition and they write everything down, so much of the Welsh language was pushed away and lost that for linguists, one of the best ways for them to study the development of the Welsh language is actually to look at old court documents, because they would write down, specifically when Welsh people would curse at them in Welsh, like to a lord or an official. So there's a really well documented, development over a long period of time of like Welsh as like a curse language. So I bring that up to say that like I have, sympathies and some understandings of these things. And I know the political context is different, specifically with Scotland and Wales. And then obviously, there's Catalan independence and other movements of that nature. I will say as a general trend, I do not think that fragmentation is what I would like to see as a Marxist. I actually would like to see these larger kind of countries and organizations that we have grow and to actually, I'm a real deal, I'd like to end that whole system in general one day. And I think that a return to like a hyper local nationalism is not necessarily something that I think is particularly good for the project. That being said, a lot of nationalist movements were really important in the anti-colonial struggle. So it's not a hard, fast rule. I just don't think in general I support this idea like, we need to go to like really small nation states all across the world. I don't find that to be a particular liberatory movement, but that being said, I mean, that's the contradiction and the dialectic of it. At a time where there are so many people who are fighting to make sure that their borders are respected. It is important to support those struggles. But with that kind of like longer term view, at least in my perspective, that's something that we really want to transcend.
Again, A Legacy of Liberation by Mark Jevisser on Thabo Mbeki and the African National Congress. Like, these are issues that, I would just recommend seeing how they've been navigated before.
Yeah.
But it is a tricky, like the kind of like how that question started was, how do you make sure that people don't go all right? Like there's like the split in the road, like, whatever. There was things that Trump was saying that was similar to Bernie in some regards, and then you see this split in the road. The intention under it, the thought under it, very different. But on the surface, that's something I do not have the answer for. It's something I think about constantly. Like, what are the defining factors? If someone wants basic necessities and respect and dignity, and there's two different options presenting themselves as the way out, even before nationalism or other kind of larger pictures, like what are the defining things that help someone pick A versus B? That can be completely what ultimately picks the government and turns between fascism or a more leftist and workers friendly form of government. I don't know what that is.
I've seen distinctions made between patriotism and nationalism, whereas nationalism is more offensive and imperial force, and patriotism is a more defensive one. I don't know how useful that distinction is, but I can be persuaded, and talking to certain audiences, it might be even one that I make use of.
Sure.
Yeah, and just like obviously like the Scottish independence movement right now, is more of like a kind of left project or like social democratic in nature, basically in opposition to like the right wing turn and control of the UK government. So like I understand the tactics of it too. I would just say though, as I said, I don't find that nationalism is necessarily like where we want things to go, but in the short term, national consciousness can be a way to build large scale solidarity, but obviously we know that's the dangers of that. Sort of on that question, and we could just say this briefly, but I'll synthesize this too. This is from our friend Bradley up in Alberta, Canada, who says that he likes my mission, talking about Texas in the South and specifically, left-wing politics in that context, pushing back against the kind of like coastal leftist perspective that just writes off, that part of the world. They also said that, they'd be interested if you're willing to share a little bit, maybe Matt's, perspective on being from North Dakota regarding this. But the question is fundamentally, what do you think the best way to organize in what they call deeply conservative areas? Most left discussion is focused on flipping liberal PMC types because those are the people situated most closely to most leftists.
Dustin Costella's kind of talked to us about a similar topic, but I would just say there's a couple things about deep red states. There's two different versions, but one of the nice things about deep red states is there's not a Democratic Party there with a sclerotic, awful bureaucracy that you can't get into. So I know a bunch of people who've been down in Texas for the last 5 years, and they've actually gotten decent positions in the party apparatus just for being there, because this is apparatus that's expanding and needs personnel. That said, so if I was in Texas, I would probably try to do something like that. Mm-hmm. In North Dakota, I don't know if I would have anything to do with the Democratic Party at all. Maybe I would, and I haven't been there for a while, and I haven't been talking to people who are actually considering about running for office there. But North Dakota it used the Democratic ticket eventually, but it had 100 years ago what was called the Nonpartisan League, which is that they had these socialist farmers basically that ran on either ticket, Democrat or Republican, but they had open primaries so you could get on the ballot. And that got a lot of results, ultimately on the Democratic ticket more than the Republican. Mm-hmm. But it started off entirely not either the parties. And the Democratic Party is so weak there that, frankly, like maybe you try depending on which office you're running, you try to build something entirely different there. I think that would be where a third party makes the most sense to me.
I can't wait for you to run there for them to get to use that clip.
I'm not going back to North Dakota to live there long enough to run for office.
Another good, it is sort of hitting on what Matt was talking about on this, is the book by Lawrence Goodwin called The Populist A Moment. And, I think the reason when I was reading that question, I hesitated on the idea of, for example, deeply conservative conceptions, because I think that is something that's put on a lot more. And I think that we need to get past that kind of label we're thinking about politics. For example, being up here in New York now, I've been amazed at how dysfunctional and ridiculous and corrupt this, supposedly like liberal state system works. So, I think that as socialists, we have a lot of work to do everywhere. And I don't think that there are parts of the country that are like heads and, shoulders over anywhere else. Specifically, I'll just talk about Texas a little bit, briefly. Like the idea of Texas being this conservative bastion is relatively new. For a long part of history, and not even like, we're not talking 1800s, we're talking like 20th century politics. Texas was a very kind of like farmer, working class, left-wing populist movement. Not to glorify those people or argue that like the people who were in power in Texas were socialists, for example, but they were promoting a kind of more pro-working class, politics. And let's not forget, it was Karl Rove who got laughed out of RNC meetings early on, but he was the political strategist who said all of these people moving to the suburbs can help us flip districts, right? And that was the strategy that the Republican Party took in Texas, which really allowed for this, GOP takeover of the state. But I push back on the political facts there just then, but also the cultural idea that, Southern culture or like Texas culture are, right-wing things, right? These are complicated, beautiful weavings of history, different people. I mean, even the history of Texas, right? Like, the kind of like white, with every kind of right-wing movement that existed, like even early independence movements in Texas, the question of slavery, for example, there were radicals and there were socialists who were fighting about that. And they're just as much as Texan as the people who ended up winning. So I think it's also really important to make sure that those stories are part of our understanding, because as we were talking about earlier with spirituality, the right wants to have a totalitizing discourse that this country and its history is a right-wing project. And there's a lot of horror and evil in this system, and we know that, and we talk about that constantly. But we need to make sure that we are also recognizing that in every one of these moments, there were people in opposition, and they were fighting tooth and nail against these people.
Yes,
that's the history that we need to take, going forward, and that's how we're going to win. And I think I like what you were saying, Matt, too. Democratic Party in those states is really weak. I mean, that's why Adolph Reed is doing incredible work in South Carolina right now, in support of Medicare for all. Right, like there are opportunities everywhere. And it's really important never to walk away from a fight. That's not in my mentality. I always hate the ideas like we can only do socialist politics and like coastal elite places, because it's not somewhere that I really want to be much longer personally. Like I'm really ready to get back home soon. And like I'm going to fight like hell, right?
I mean, Luke Mayville's also
and just
doing
showing,
great work in Ohio.
And also just really...
Idaho.
Idaho, sorry.
Yeah,
Yikes, my coastal elitism is showing that.
Also Austin, the DSA movements in Texas are very vibrant right now too. And I have to shout out all those organizations who won some major elections recently. People are doing the work everywhere in Louisiana, New Orleans. The fight is going to continue on all fronts, and that's what that's how the perspective that we have to have, because we want to win. We don't want to just win like symbolic victories every once in a while. We want to win power for real in a long-lasting way, and that's going to mean taking on big fights.
And Texans were a part of the last time any kind of remotely left coalition did that, right? Like I forget what the guy's name is, but Chris, who you met, who we were on the Oscar Wilde episode, Literary Hangover, there's some Texan anti-monopolist that he did a whole bunch of like research on recently. I wish I've been searching trying to find his name, but yeah, like that was like progressive area, right? Yeah. Like Texas was just that until it was Nixon.
I mean, it was really like the final flip was, but the real final flip was like 90s. That's when like the state went over to like just being the solid red that it is now. I mean, don't forget like Ann Richards, who like is a very fascinating character, a former governor of Texas, who Bush ended up beating out, and there's like she's such an interesting person, a real tough as hell Texas a woman. I wouldn't categorize her as particularly progressive. You know, that was a Democratic Party, governor, and it was really this Bush movement that sort of swept out and has been able to maintain power for a long time. Anyways, the point is like the history is short, and and nothing is defined, and this attitude that these things are settled is ridiculous.
It's like we're essentializing Texans. Like it's insane.
With the whole South too. I mean, the whole South
right
history.
It's also like the grit and like tenacity you need to really be doing this stuff where you're in these states, and that's like not the predominant action is like so much more intense and real, and to just sort of like dismiss that and sweep that under the carpet is just honestly just really rude and insulting to what people are doing. It's like unbelievable.
But anyways, Bradley, do the fight, we're talking about in Alberta. I know there's a similar kind of story there too, I believe. Solidarity to all of you. I love all of these people fighting.
I also want to say I love Canada. The Jordan Peterson stuff is standalone, but Canada, great country. Things are happening there that are awesome. I wasn't trying to drag your accents. That's all I'm apologizing for. I'm worried my Canadian friends are watching.
So
sorry.
Yeah, you better. I'll tell you when you're sorry.
Sorry.
Do we have any super chats, or should we do another Patreon?
Dave L has a request. Can someone get Burgess to talk about pragmatism and C.S. Pierce? Pragmatism. That would be interesting. I'm unfamiliar with C.S. Pierce. And some well wishes. Also, be careful with the gun stuff, folks. Just want to reiterate that. Just careful with the gun stuff. Guns are... I mean, it is. It's I've walked a lot of pheasant lines, with a whole bunch of people with shotguns, and I never quite got over the fact that I was holding something where if I just aimed it in the wrong direction and pulled the trigger, a life would be over. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty. It's
serious.
The only time I ever shot a gun was on a date, and we were at a shooting range, and I'm learning how to shoot the gun, and then all of a sudden I didn't have a permit, and this cop pulls up, and I'm kind of nervous, and he's literally seems like he's 17, and he gets out of the car, and he just looks at it, he's like, oh yeah, he's talking a mile a minute. He has this huge shotgun. He's like, oh, this is jammed. I'm on duty right now. But I just need to shoot off a few rounds. He's like, I just learned the 4 basics. Don't hold it at anyone. Don't, treat every gun like it's loaded or, it's hot.
Right.
And he comes out of the car and just immediately is following none of the rules that I learned 5 minutes ago. And then just doesn't ask us any information what we're doing. He just starts shooting this gun. I guess it was jammed. I didn't quite understand what was happening. And they got back in the car. I was like, okay, this is just not my scene.
Yeah. I think he might have been anabolically jammed.
That was in Massachusetts, though. So that doesn't speak for other parts of the country.
Also, was Michael ever planning on trying to get Angela Davis on the show? And I think we were actually.
Yeah.
I think that was actually scheduled. That's all for super chats.
Yeah, well, I think we've done a good amount of stuff. We can't get to everything in here. I really appreciate all the questions, especially even the longer ones that we weren't able to answer. It's really great to have these for us to game out future content. I guess a quick one, if any of y'all know, somebody asked if anyone knows Michael's favorite Nas song.
Ooh, should I text my mom?
Oh,
I wouldn't know.
Phone a friend. I mean, he just loved all Nas. I don't know if there was one ultimate song.
Said something about similar to that effect. Actually, wants to
just find the most obscure Nas song you can find, and then say that one's your favorite, and that will do Michael proud, I think.
Yeah, just listen to all Nas.
The album tracks. Just say an album track, and you'll be.
I think we're pretty good here. Let me.
I want to just say one thing. Maybe we could probably have this conversation not fair, but we've talked about wanting to do a Twitch stream in the future. Maybe we start doing that on a Sunday night thing. This feels like a conversation we've been having off, but I figured we want to expand into we want to get off just YouTube. So I would say if folks wanted TMBS to get on Twitch, stay tuned.
Yeah, let us know. I think somebody suggested checking out Assad Hader's book, Mistaken Identity, which I put on the Patreon to them that we actually interviewed Assad a while ago. So I think you can find that interview on YouTube if you're curious what Michael and us thought about that book. I mean, I really like Assad's writing a lot. I think he's a really interesting thinker, and I think that's sort of it from what we're going to be able to get to from the Patreon questions. Do we want to do this last little?
Yeah. Do you have the tweets
Before we go? Yeah. Let me pull it up. In 1 second. I mean, this is just such a great encapsulation of what we're trying to fight against, and a reminder that just replacing the Trump administration with this other party is not going to solve our problems.
Oh, God.
So this is Chris Murphy.
Who I would just want to say before you go on. Chris Murphy, I remember when I started at Majority Report, it was like people in the media, like even kind of the lefty media, gave him credit as like sort of a liberal that was trying on foreign policy. So anyway.
Very thought, honestly. I mean, so basically this is his tweet thread from today where he says today the Senate Foreign Relations Committee holds a hearing on the Trump administration's Venezuela policy. A short story, it's been a case study in diplomatic malpractice, and I want to tell you the quick story of how Trump's bungling has empowered a brutal dictator. In early 2019, an opportunity presented itself.
Ooh.
Maduro's re-election was a fraud, and the world knew it. The charismatic opposition leader, Juan Guaido, which is amazing editorializing.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
The dopey opposition leader, Juan Guaido, stood ready to capitalize and restore democracy to the nation.
Look at this language. An opportunity presented itself. I'm ready to capitalize. Like this is a fucking credit card commercial or something.
Absolutely. The winning play was right in front of us. Bring together all of Latin America behind a transition, new free elections, and take the time to work with or neutralize Maduro's patrons, Russia, Cuba, and to a lesser extent, China. Trump couldn't talk to Cuba because Obama. Putin had Trump wrapped around his finger, and all Trump wanted to do was talk to China about was the trade deal. I mean, this goes on for a while.
7 is the relevant one. Oh, 6 is funny too, though.
Yeah. In fact, the opposite happened by putting Elliot Abrams, the symbol of American imperialism, in quotation marks.
He's just an agent of it.
In Latin America, in charge of Venezuela, and by acting largely alone, Trump helped Maduro rally the military and much of the country against America and cast Guaido as a U.S. pawn. Then it got real embarrassing. In April 2019, we tried to organize a kind of coup, but it became a debacle. Everyone who told us that the rally to Guaido got cold feet, and the plan failed publicly and spectacularly, making America look foolish and weak.
How about menacing and lawless would be the phrases I would use.
And without public support. I mean, the amazing thing about this is he's talking about, we're going to bring the people in Latin America together. The people he's talking about, by the way, are like right-wing, leaders like Bolsonaro, people who benefit greatly from U.S. intervention in their countries, not an actual groundswell of popular public support. And that's the fantasy that they're trying to present, and why this tweet thread is so nasty. Because it really does show a kind of like ideological position that so many of these Democrats have. Is like the problem with Donald Trump is not that he's trying to interfere and destroy other countries' political systems. It's that he's not doing it well, and he's making it too obvious that they're trying to intervene, right?
Yeah. If we only had a better figurehead and not Elliot Abrams, we could have got away with this.
Exactly.
Dark. I have some news on the Nas front.
Okay.
This direct from my mom, which I agree with these three. The world is yours, New York State of mind, and represent.
I think that those were definite ones that he requested I play before interviews on Majority Report.
Absolutely.
So I think that sounds right.
They're vetted, and we all stand behind them.
Well, those are great. Oh man. Well, I think we're pretty good for right now.
Yeah. Patreon.com/TMBS, folks. Help us keep the mission alive.
Yeah, there's also, going through the questions at Patreon, there are some questions that, we have writing that's unfinished that Michael had certain answers to, and there are interviews we want to have. So some of your questions, there's so much more than just the question. So if we didn't get to your question tonight, it might be because we're trying to figure out like the right guest to have on the show and the right time to get more in depth about some of these things you brought up. So just, stay tuned and let's keep growing this community.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I really love taking the opportunity. One, thank you, Matt and Alicia. It's always great to chat with y'all, but it's also really beautiful to chat with the community. Y'all are a big part of this project in my life, and I'm so grateful for everything y'all have done, and I'm excited to continue that going forward. Just so people know who have gone on our website, tmbs.fm, and bought merch recently, that has been amazing, the amount of support that we've gotten. And all of those things are coming. It's going to take a little bit just because of COVID and because we got such a large amount of orders. But those are going to be delivered very soon. And definitely check all that stuff out going forward as well. That's been an amazing source of support for us in the show too.
Yeah.
And just in terms of like grief, this is just like a respite, and it feels kind of like we're going to kind of in a weird way hang out with Michael, and it's just it feels just I don't know. Grief is so strange. I don't know. This is the first time anything this. There really aren't words. I know people say that's kind of cheap, but the abyss of just bottomless pain is there, and I feel like I'm still in a state of shock around it, but getting to know that he touched so many people's lives and so many of you have kind of committed to carrying on his work and his vision is just it's like the one thing that just feels it's not really a relief or a positive thing, but it just feels like a good thing. It feels like a really fucking terrible, unexpected thing happened, and then there's this other thing the commitment and the amount of people that have just reached out to tell me that Michael's inspired you to just get involved and do this work on your own and be in this community, but also pushing on the vision and reaching out to other people. I'm just really humbled by it, and I include myself with those people. So I'm one of you, and I see you, and I really appreciate you.
Yeah, it's sustaining is how I would.
Yeah. And just so grateful to the two of you. That's it.
All right, folks, we'll be back same time next week, at least. So watch this space for more. See you later.
All right.
Anarchy.